I'd like to tell you the story tonight of the worst thing I've ever done in my life. Very, very bad thing. Having done 21 years jail, you'd think there'd be a few bad things I must have done. I did all that for drugs, and I don't have any regrets about it, or I don't feel any remorse for the things I've done. No one ever accused me of ripping them off. No one ever felt cheated. No one ever reported me for doing something bad. I never asked someone to do something they didn't want to do. I don't want to get into a discussion about the morals or rights and wrongs of what I did. I just want to point out that there should be a whole lot of stuff I really should feel ashamed of, but I don't. But there is one thing I did once I should be ashamed of. I was a door-to-door photographer, taking children's photos, something I was very good at, can always make them laugh. And a mate of mine from school who had a rich dad, he'd bought a real estate agency in Townsville. And he came to me and said, "Tim, I want you to come and be my property manager." I said, "Don't be ridiculous, I know nothing about real estate." He said, "You're smart, you'll work it out." He'd bought a half partnership in this business, and I think he wanted someone in there that he could trust, someone on his side, an old schoolmate. So I found myself managing 1,600 flats and houses, massive rent roll, biggest in Townsville. And we all hear horror stories about tenants, bad tenants, and in my experience most people are pretty good. Most people treat the property well. But there's a minority that don't, and I came across it. I'd had report after report and complaint after complaint about this particular house in West End. Fights constantly, yelling and screaming, police always being called, chasing each other down the street at 3 o'clock in the morning naked with knives, all that sort of usual stuff. Grass was all this long, terrible. And the neighbours kept begging me to please evict these people. So I went around to see them, and I said, "Look, I've had a lot of complaints about your behaviour." I said, "I'm not going to do anything about it today, but if it goes on, I will have to evict you." And he explained that it wasn't, he didn't start it. He was a white guy with a big pot gut. If I had to describe him, it'd be like one of those guys from the American TV shows about croc hunters and hillbillies and all that sort of stuff. He was the Townsville equivalent of that. And he was married to a lady from Palm Island who was as black as they come. And he explained it, "Look, it's not me, Tim." He said, "It's the relatives. They drop around, they get on the drink and it all starts off." And I said, "Look, I don't care who it is. If I get another complaint, you'll be evicted." The funny thing was I liked the guy. He was very open and honest. He was what he was. Well, I went back to being my property manager, and I got some more complaints, but I was a bit too busy to action it. And then my boss came to me and he said, "Tim, I've just bought a block of land down near the Strand, 1 block from the Strand, right on the corner." He said, "If I can get the house next door, I can get permission for high-rise." This was back when you could get permission for high-rise. He said, "I'll make a fortune." He said, "But there's a little old lady lives in that house. She's lived there all her life, probably born there. She won't sell." He said, "I want you to get the worst tenants you've got and put them into the house next door I just bought." Now we know what a mongrel act that would be, to harass a little old lady like that you didn't even know. Terrible thing to do. But I owed this guy the job, so I very quickly said, "I think I've got just the tenants." So I went around to see my mate in West End. I wrote out an eviction order. I went and said, "Listen, the bad news is you're evicted. The good news is, jump in the car, come and I'll show you." And I drove him over to North Ward. I said, "This is his house here. It's 1 block from the Strand. It's 2 blocks from the central school where your kids and your grandkids can go to school. And you can have it for less rent than you're paying now if you move in 2 days." Naturally, he moved. About 2 weeks later, I was just driving by and I thought I'd better just see how much of a mess I've made of the yard already and what's, I was just driving slowly by and the little old lady was in the front yard. I'd never met her, but she somehow recognised me and she waved me over. And I went over and she said, "You're Mr. Walton, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Mr. Walton, I want you to know I know what you tried to do and I forgive you." She said, "Mr. Walton, I've never felt so needed." She told me that every morning she's getting the kids in, making them have a shower, giving them breakfast, cutting their lunch and getting them off to school. I never did follow up what happened after that. I left that job and started selling real estate and never really saw. I know my mate never built a high-rise. Well, years and years later, I found myself in jail again for about 5.5 years. And I didn't get visits. I don't drag the people outside in to do my jail time with me. I get on and do it and re-engage when I get out. But after about 4 years, I got a visit from one of my best friends that I've known since we were kids. And he just came to see me out of the blue. And he told me that my mate who'd given me the job in real estate had died. And so I don't often tell this story about that little old lady and what I did. But I naturally told him that story about how he'd asked me to put the worst tenant I could find next to the little old lady. And he told me something pretty amazing. His mum was very, very old. And I'd known that she was in palliative care for quite a long time. She was sort of nothing wrong with her, she was just very old. So she was there for maybe a year. And every week he'd go up and visit her for a couple of hours and sit and talk to his mum. And in the bed next to his mum was a little old white lady, and the only visitors she got was a pot-bellied white guy and a black as black Palm Island lady that would come up and visit her. So the only people that cared about that little old lady at the end of her life was the people that I deliberately put into the house next door to harass her to move, as the only friends she had. Now, that story, it's impossible for me to find a moral about it. Obviously, the moral isn't you can do bad things because they might turn out all right. The only thing I can take from it is that we have to recognise when miracles happen and celebrate them. Thank you.